Mixtape Stories, where science fiction, humor, the search for meaning, and Gen X nostalgia meet.
When the shimmering dissipated, the midnight sky had changed to a pre-sunset hue, and the soulless apartment complex was gone. I was standing on a residential street, facing a quaint red brick mid-century home with a sunroom facing the street. It was really familiar. Wait a second. It was Mom's house. I was at good old 20 Ostrich Lane in New Orleans. Standing just beyond the driveway, I instinctively stepped back to get out of the puddle that had been there since E.T. came out. But there was no puddle. And Mom's house. No wonder why I didn't recognize it at first. It wasn't the dilapidated teardown that I had come to accept in my life. Rather, the red brick looked freshly scrubbed. I just stood there, staring. Home. This was my home. I couldn't exactly say when I was, but the VW bus in the driveway let me know that this was far back. I checked my phone to get the date, but of course, there was no signal. So I switched it on to airplane mode to save on the battery. Whenever I was, it was winter, and I was wearing a t-shirt coming from Austin in April. I stared longingly in front of my undamaged childhood home. This house, it was the most wonderful house you could ever grow up in. I desperately wanted to run inside and see my parents again. I bet Dad was sitting down to watch Welcome Back Kotter. My mom was likely playing the Beatles on the stereo in the dining room while little me and Heidi were eating Vienna sausages and soaking up a happy childhood. I was about to get lost in sentimentality when I reminded myself to pull it together. Complete the causality loop and get paid. I turned away from the house and headed towards the main thoroughfare of Lee Boulevard. Lake Vista wasn't in the center of town, and I couldn't summon an Uber, so my best option was to wait at the bus stop. When it arrived, I handed the driver a $1 bill and looked around the cabin to gather clues as to when I was. There were ads for cool cigarettes and antacids, but no digital display showing the time and date. There was one other passenger who was reading a newspaper, and I saw the classifieds lying beside him. And I saw the date, February 22nd, 1976. Hoo yeah! Perfect landing! Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs hadn't even formed Apple yet. I got off the bus in mid-city and walked into the Pelican Breeze Motel. It was trashy. They rented rooms by the hour. But it was near the fairgrounds and they didn't require ID. When I got into my room, I didn't know what to do with myself here. So, I turned on the TV, which had a total of 5 stations to choose from. At midnight, all the networks went off the air. There was no catastrophe, no nuclear attack or anything to explain why the stations went to static. They simply decided there was no point to keep broadcasting after midnight. With the TV static in the background, I charged my iPhone and played some Rick and Morty episodes that I downloaded onto the laptop and reviewed some spreadsheets to get a handle on some of the horse races in New Orleans scheduled for this week. Before shimmering, I collected a list of gambling joints that existed throughout the country back in the day, as well as the results of a myriad of things people gamble on, to include sports as well as politics. Sort of my own gray sports almanac, if you will. The following morning, I made my way to the fairgrounds. It was time to pull my first biff. I sure hope that Back to the Future 2 had it right, as I squeamishly laid down a grand for some long shots that will supposedly win. But what if there was some sort of butterfly effect that nobody, not even Hollywood, could account for? Fortunately, there was no butterfly effect. Every race was a win, and I walked out $8,000 richer in a single day. Now, in a perfect world, I would have stayed in New Orleans and sucked the fairgrounds dry. But I knew that would be asking for it with the local mafia around. So, I took a Greyhound to Lafayette and found a gentleman's club and placed bets on the presidential primaries. I banked nicely on that and took the Greyhound to the next town. America was a large country, and gambling, albeit illegal, was a thriving business in the 1970s. There were dozens of cities, hundreds of places, and thousands of sporting and political events to choose from. Daddy needed some Apple stock, and I was here to biff my way to it. "1976 must have some kind of tan lens on it, because everywhere I went had this strange brownish hue to it. The sky, the buildings, even the colors of clothes. I suppose it was just the smog. Speaking of smoke, people here smoke like it was going out of style. I walked into a grocery store to pick up a TV dinner, that's what they called it back now, and saw a lady smoking a cigarette with her children in the cart. Now that I thought about it, I remember my mom doing the same thing. My gambling took me to nightclubs, strip bars, and racetracks, where I'd find myself surrounded by people wearing gold chains, paisley shirts, leisure suits, and bell-bottoms. I felt as though I was walking onto the set of a TV show mocking the 1970s, like they were all being meta and referencing themselves. But being meta wouldn't be a thing for another few decades. That being said, my short haircut and modest collared single-toned shirt made me stand out. So, I traded my casual wear for garish polyester and started growing out a mustache. I knew before shimmering in that there were going to be adjustments. I braced myself for a world without streaming, social media, or Conway Google to answer any questions that might arise. But I hadn't prepared myself for how bad the coffee was. Back home, baristas took their craft as seriously as an IRS auditor, sourcing single origin, small batch responsibly grown beans only. Very worst case, I would suffer through a Starbucks at an airport. Here, the best I could manage was something called Taster's Choice. And don't get me started about the food selection. But, despite the sad coffee and the bland cuisine, the money was rolling in, from $5,300 to $20,000 to $45,000. I was biffing hard. Stick and move. Come into town, biff it, and leave on the next Greyhound before anyone could get suspicious. That's what I did for the next several months. Jumping around from town to town and staying in dingy motel rooms sent my subconscious scrambling to make sense of it all. Sometimes I'd wake up and not know where or when I was. I'd check for news alerts on my phone before realizing my new reality. Sometimes I dreamt I was back home at Mom's house, the wonderful tidy home I saw here in 1976. Maybe seeing it again stirred my subconscious to recreate it. Mom was in many of these dreams, and she wasn't that panic-ridden woman dying of dementia. She was the way she used to be, before it all went to shit. I missed 2016 more and more as the weeks passed, which I didn't think was ever possible. I wanted to stream again. I wanted nitro cold brew and stupid memes and gas station sushi. I even missed annoying things like doom scrolling and spam texts. But if I returned to 2016 for a coffee break, how would I return here without having to start all over? And if I returned to exactly where and when I emerged in the first time here, what would happen to this version of me? Would I be overwritten? The bizarre condition I was in, along with being a 21st century alien alone in 1976, often threatened to push me to select the home button on the Shimmer app. To keep the homesickness at bay, I'd often go for a run and play 21st century comfort music. Jogging along a desert road at sunrise with the mountains in the distance had a timeless element to it, and I repeated the mantra, complete the causality loop and get paid. One of the major spokes in completing this causality loop was Jasmine Bartels, my future business partner. When would I meet her? How would I meet her? I had to go on faith that I was doing exactly what I did to find her in the first place, which kind of fucked with my sense of free will. But whether we existed in a predeterministic universe or not, I was going to need a local to be my business partner if this plan was going to succeed. Unlike the past few months where I'd pop in and out of town in a day or two, I spent nearly a week in Las Vegas. By the time I boarded the Greyhound heading to California, I had crossed the $100,000 threshold. I was itching to make the push for Silicon Valley, but there was this one boxing match in Fresno that I couldn't pass up. Back in 2016, I happened upon an article about the best sports upsets, and one of them was a boxing match between Juan the Butcher Gonzalez and Vic the Temperamental Simpson. Gonzalez was the heavy favorite, but the people who handicapped these events didn't count on the Butcher suffering a heart attack in the middle of the match. The fight was less than an hour away by the time the Greyhound pulled up to the station in Fresno. I didn't have time to check into a motel, so I put $3,500 into a knapsack and stuffed my hiking backpack containing the rest of the money, as well as my laptop, into a locker and headed straight for TNA Sports, a sleazy joint dedicated to women's oil wrestling. The boxing match was non-sanctioned, so the organizers went with this place because it did have a ring, along with copious amounts of baby oil. When the Butcher Gonzalez and the Temperamental Simpson stood toe-to-toe, Simpson strained his neck, looking up to meet the Butcher's glare. During the first two rounds, Simpson did the smart thing and ran from the Butcher. As the third round began, the Butcher started to pant. He stumbled. Simpson took his shot, and the Butcher collapsed. When the ref counted to 10, Simpson leapt onto his manager, elated. I was equally thrilled, having turned $3,500 into $20,000. This not only meant I had enough cash to lay down the $100,000 for Apple computers, I had additional funds to live on. I congratulated the Temperamental Simpson and his manager on a job well done, and saw someone holding a Polaroid camera. "Hey, would y'all mind taking a selfie with me?" They had no idea what a selfie was, but we crammed together to take the photo of me, the Temperamental Simpson, and his manager, Tommy Fourfingers, in front of the TNA Sports sign. The guy handed me the Polaroid, and I put it into my knapsack. It was my first memento from 1976. All was right with the world. And that, as we all know, is when the shit hits the fan. Two men followed me out of TNA Sports into the alley.
"Hey, asshole."
I turned around. I actually turned around as though my name were Asshole.
"You cheated. We want our money back."
Of all of the times before, I had successfully avoided this kind of encounter. Why now? I considered my options and concluded the best thing to do was to run. It worked with the taxi incident. They gave chase. I might not be a fast runner, but these guys petered out before I even made it to the street. Being the only non-smoker in 1976 is like having superpowers. As I reached the street, I turned and kept running to get more distance between me and them. A cop car screeched to a halt with its lights and sirens on, and a cop jumped out. I was about to say, "Hey, thank God some dudes were trying to mug me," when the cop pulled his revolver on me.
"Freeze, motherfucker! Down on the ground!"
What? Because I was gambling? I did as he ordered and lay on the ground. Other police cars pulled up, and the cop proceeded to handcuff me. As he pulled me into the car, I said, "Man, y'all take gambling seriously around here." The cop snorted.
"Try bank robbery, asshole."
The So You Want a Shimmer guide was very explicit about getting arrested in the past. It said, "If at all possible, do not get arrested." It's sound advice. The police confiscated my knapsack, which contained over $20,000 in small bills, which they assumed to be the cash from a bank that had just been robbed nearby. Or at least, that's what I gathered from the cops speaking with each other. During processing, the intake officer pulled out my iPhone from my pocket. Fortunately, it was turned off, but the officer examined it curiously. "It's a toy," I explained. "You know, from that show, Space 1999. Yeah, that's it. My nephew gave it to me and said that way we could always keep in touch." He grunted.
Does your nephew know his uncle's a bank robber?
Not giving it another thought, the processing officer wrote "toy communicator" on a sticker and placed the iPhone into a property bag. I was about to breathe a sigh of relief when he pulled out the Bluetooth earbuds that were in my jacket. Those are heated ear canal warmers."
You get cold ear canals?
"Don't you?" The cop muttered under his breath and placed it into the property bag as well. He proceeded to pull my extra clothes out of the knapsack.
What in the hell are these?
He exclaimed, holding up a pair of my underwear. I looked at him, equally puzzled that he would have such an extreme reaction. "What, the boxer briefs?"
Boxer briefs? Is that some Hollywood thing?
Christian Vaughn's birth certificate, which I got during a stop in Oklahoma City, was with the hiking backpack back at the bus station locker. I didn't have any ID on me outside of a Piggly Wiggly rewards card, which was also the name Chris Vaughn, so I identified myself as Christian Vaughn. One of the cops tried to ask me about a bank robbery, but I wasn't going to talk until I got a lawyer and was given my phone call. The problem was, there was nobody I could call. I knew my mom's phone number by heart, but I figured that was a multi-tiered clusterfuck of an idea. This was just terrible. Absolutely horrible. I was stuck in jail in 1976, charged for a crime I didn't commit, and my only means to get home was no longer in my possession. The following morning, I went to the arraignment, where my court-appointed attorney, who reeked of alcohol, suggested that I plead guilty. I pled not guilty and was given an orange jumpsuit and placed into the general population. I tried to reassure myself that I'd be okay. I was in that Omni article, right? It's not like I could be a successful venture capitalist from prison. But what if I created a new timeline where I ended up in prison, and that Omni magazine was an artifact from another timeline, a product of multiversal spillage? There was no mention of a Christian Vaughn getting arrested for a bank robbery in the archives. Somehow I must have fucked up and diverged from the original causality loop.
Chris Vaughn!
A prison guard called. I awoke from a dream where I was back at Mom's house, the way I saw it here when I first shimmered in. But I was working on the Shimmer app because dreams are weird like that.
Christian Vaughn!
He repeated. Yes, sir.
Your attorney wants to speak with you.
The guard unlocked the door and guided me to the interview room. The person on the other side of the table wasn't the inebriated lawyer I had earlier, but a very attractive young woman dressed in a brown lady's leisure suit, and she sported an afro. When the cop left the room, she lit a cigarette and offered me one. I declined, which probably never happened in the history of lockups. I was still getting accustomed to the idea that you could just smoke indoors like she was doing. There was something about her.
Mr. Vaughn, my name is Jasmine Bartels. I've been assigned to represent you.
Jasmine Bartels! Of course! My future partner. I then recalled the Wikipedia page on her. Jasmine started off as a public defender. I broke out into a shit-eating grin and cried out, Holy smokes, you're Jasmine Bartels! She looked at me suspiciously.
Yes, that's right. The previous court-appointed defense attorney was caught intoxicated on the job. Again, the judge doesn't want there to be a mistrial. That's why he wants to start all over with the arraignment tomorrow.
Jasmine knitted her brows.
Are you listening, Mr. Vaughn?
Yes, I am. But listen, I didn't rob any bank. Jasmine took a drag from her cigarette.
The police here think they got their man, and with the cash, it's pretty convincing.
I won that money.
You won it? Where?
At a boxing match, a place called T&A Sports.
So, the police catch you hauling down the street where the bank was just robbed, and it's a coincidence?
I really was at the wrong place at the wrong time. Just get the bank's video footage and you'll see.
Video footage?
She asked incredulously. Shit. They didn't have video cameras on every street corner back then. I couldn't believe I was actually longing for the hyper-monitored world I used to detest. Look, Jasmine, Ms. Bartels, you have every right to dismiss me, but I am innocent. She studied me for several long seconds. Finally, she said,
Show me your arms.
Strange request, but I did as she asked, pulling up the sleeves.
No needle marks. You have dainty knuckles. You haven't been in a fight in your entire life, have you? And no biker or prison gang tattoos that I can see.
Well, I thought a biker tat might be a tad gauche. A hint of a smile broke through.
And no common bank robber would say gauche. All right, you said that you were at this place. What was it called? T&A Sports?
That's right. I put down $3,500 for Vic the Temperamental Simpson and won $20,000.
Okay, you just hang tight. I'm gonna follow up on some leads before the arraignment tomorrow.
I'm not going anywhere. I have to say, I haven't felt this good since the whole journey began. Finally, I found Jasmine Bartels. My mom would say that this was divine order in action. At this point, I'd be willing to believe her. Later that day, I got another visitor, an attorney representing a prestigious law firm who learned about the drunk public defender, and it was the law office's practice to do pro bono work from time to time. But I declined because I already had Jasmine. The following morning, I was brought to the arraignment. Again,
The Honorable Judge Lucius Grimley now presides.
where I was seated next to Jasmine Bartels. She leaned over and whispered.
You didn't tell me you had a photo op.
I gave her a confused look, and she patted me on the shoulder. The prosecutor read the charges, and that's when Jasmine called to dismiss the case. She pulled up a newspaper article about the non-sanctioned boxing match at T&A Sports, where the butcher Gonzalez had lost very unexpectedly to the temperamental Simpson, which occurred at about the same time as the bank robbery. Then she presented a Polaroid. That's right, the selfie. I had put the selfie in the knapsack along with the cash. Jasmine presented the Polaroid of me giving the finger guns beside a very elated temperamental Simpson and his manager Four Fingers, with the T&A Sports sign in the background. The judge called Jasmine and the prosecutor over to the bench and they spoke in hushed voices. I couldn't make out everything, but when the prosecution brought up the cash, the judge said, "Well, I can't just ignore the Simpson T&A evidence." Jasmine then asked a Fresno detective if the cash stolen from the bank was new stacks of 20s and 100s or crumpled up wads of 1s, 5s, and 10s. Without answering the question, the prosecution removed the objection and the judge accepted the motion to dismiss the case. I was a free man. I was relieved to have been cleared of the charges, but I held my breath until I was handed back my property, specifically my iPhone, identified as a toy communicator. While Jasmine was counting to $20,000 to ensure that it was all there, I took the opportunity to power it up. This violated a business practice of mine, but I just needed to know that it wasn't damaged. Jasmine handed me the stack of money in an envelope and cocked her head.
I heard that an attorney from Drake and Forsyth showed up yesterday. They're only about the best defense law firm in the entire state of California, and you declined their services.
That's right, I did.
It's not the thing most people would do.
Yeah, but I knew you'd win.
And how do you know that?
I indicated to the door. Mind if we get some air as I explain? We left Central Lockup and made our way across the street to a park outside the County Superior Court, where she lit up another cigarette. I needed to get Jasmine on board, so how did I do it the first time? Which, if I thought about it, was like right now. I couldn't just say, I'm a time traveler. I mean, that's stupid, right? I had to be smooth about it. We were well into the park when finally I just gave it a stab. I chose you over that law firm for the same reason I knew to put the money on the temperamental Simpson. And for the same reason I know that Reagan's going to defeat Ford in the North Carolina primary tomorrow by 7 points.
And how can you know that? You rigged the primary?
I know because I'm from the future, Jasmine. I'm from the year 2016. Okay, stupid was the only option I could come up with. Jasmine gave me a look. The kind you make when you meet a flat earther and you don't know whether they're just punking you or they really believe it. I held up my hand. Look, I know it sounds crazy, but you have to believe me. I'm from 40 years in the future. I can tell you anything you want to know. Try me. She took a long drag from her cigarette.
Okay, future boy. Who's president of the United States in 2016?
Barack Obama, and he's black. Jasmine folded her arms.
Oh, I bet.
Then it occurred to me that I had the obvious evidence in my pocket. Wait, I can prove it to you. I pulled out my iPhone. See this? It's called an iPhone. You like music? I got my entire music library on this thing. I pressed the shuffle and it went directly to the yeah, yeah, yeahs. Unfortunately, my excited state seemed to only scare Jasmine.
Listen, Mr. Vaughn, I've got to go.
I was losing her. She walked away hurriedly. And then I remembered her wiki entry on something she said on YouTube. Moomopopus! Jasmine stopped. She had her back to me still, ready to bolt, but she did stop.
What did you just say?
Moomopopus was your imaginary friend, right? Half cow, half octopus? I was going on that faint memory of that speech she gave to the graduating class. Jasmine approached me cautiously.
I never told anyone but my parents about Moomopopus.
Her eyes turned to the iPhone playing the yeah, yeah, yeahs. I offered it to her, which she took gingerly. When she touched the screen, her eyes widened with surprise. Jasmine, I'm from the future, and I need your help.
This is absolutely incredible.
Jasmine said as she scrolled through my iPhone. We were sitting in the back of a near-empty Chinese restaurant. She couldn't believe how many songs it could hold. Witnessing her awe over something so mundane as a smartphone reminded me how easily we get used to new realities. I was slightly distracted by the song the restaurant stereo was playing. I didn't know the name of the artist, but that song? God, it would shimmer me hard.
It's like nothing I've ever seen, not even on Star Trek.
She thumbed through the photos and videos, her jaw slack, being all gobsmacked. It was a shame there wasn't any internet service. If I could show Jasmine how maps worked, her head would explode.
Where do you insert the tapes?
I beg your pardon?
The tapes, you know, the reels to play the music you were playing. Where do you insert the tapes?
I couldn't help but chuckle at the thought of having to insert these tiny little tapes into the phone. I turned to her. It doesn't have any tapes or any moving parts. The recordings are stored digitally on the hard drive.
Digital storage? Hard drive? You make it sound like it's a computer.
It is a computer.
A computer that fits inside your pocket. And you say anybody can buy one of these?
Yeah, you can buy one at any grocery store. I didn't realize how weird that sounded until just now.
And it connects to the internet and has immediate access to all information around the world?
That's right.
Wow! A handheld portable computer that gives everyone instant access to all information? The world of 2016 must be great.
I shifted in my seat uncomfortably. Yeah, it's, something.
So, can you call people on Mars with this?
Mars? Jasmine saw my confused look.
Are you saying we don't have cities on Mars?
What gave you the idea that we would?
I don't know, maybe because you have a computer the size of a cigarette case with more computational power than NASA and this internet thing? I just thought that if we had something like this, then surely we'd have off-world colonies.
Sorry.
So what have you been doing with this technology?
I think we generally use it to look up porn and to get into arguments with strangers online.
Guess that doesn't leave a lot of time to explore the cosmos or chat on the phone, huh?
Well, FYI, we don't actually answer the phone anymore.
What? Why?
Because it's usually some kind of robocall scam.
You have robots trying to scam you?
After trying to make sense of the world I described to her, Jasmine finally just gave up. The future was just as disappointing to her as it was to me.
Okay, so this is your taxi app? This is your app to order and get food delivered. And what's this?
Ah, that's the time travel music app. I proceeded to tell Jasmine about the article from the 1984 issue of Omni, where I learned that she and I will become one of the most successful venture capitalists in Silicon Valley in the coming years. It's going to be a revolution, I exclaimed. The dawn of the information age. And it starts with Apple. But we're not going to just stop there. I know which companies are going to dominate, which stocks will rise, which will fall. And what's more, I know when. We're going to be rich, I tell you. Rich! Jasmine lit what had to be her fifth cigarette.
So, let me get this straight. You broke the laws of physics and appended the space-time continuum just so you could get rich?
Well, geez, you make it sound so sleazy when you put it like that.
I'm serious.
Look, I'm not just talking about me. I'm talking about both of us. You and I are going to become partners. She shook her head.
I can't just quit my job to help some time-traveling turkey with a gambling problem complete his causality loop, or whatever it is you called it. I have responsibilities to real people, here and now.
I forgot what kind of person I was dealing with. Jasmine wasn't driven by money. She graduated from Harvard Law. She could have written her own ticket, but she chose to be a public defender here in Fresno of all places. And when she did eventually become rich, she donated most of her wealth helping others. She was as idealistic as my mom had been. Maybe I should have led with that from the start. So I switched tact. Look, this isn't simply about getting rich. I mean, yes, for me it is. But you? In the coming years, you're going to use your wealth and influence to bring Silicon Valley money to Oakland schools and libraries. You'll end up doing so much more for the people as a VC executive than as a public defender. You'll force Silicon Valley to come to Oakland with their hats in their hand. And it was in that commencement speech I saw on YouTube where I realized this was your calling just as it's mine.
You sure have a silver tongue, Christian. I'll give you that, but I can't just quit my job to help you start some investment firm right now.
I rubbed my handlebar mustache, which was coming in nicely. Okay, maybe you could still do your day job, but you could also be my lawyer. I mean, like, permanently. I need someone here who's established that I can rely on. And I'd be willing to pay you a retainer. How does $5,000 sound? I grabbed a fistful of cash out of the backpack when she reached over to stop me.
What are you trying to do? Get me fired? Put that away! If I agree to this, you don't ever do anything like that, you dig?
So, do I have a lawyer? She twisted her lips as she considered the jive-ass fool with cash and no references sitting across from her. She extended her hand and we shook. Jasmine's parents in Oakland had a garage apartment available for rent. She called them up on a payphone and used up a few dimes, convincing her dad that this scruffy white guy she's asking them to board is good people and that I would pay them 6 months' rent up front. After she got off the phone, Jasmine read me the riot act.
Okay, here's the deal. They're reluctant, but the $1,000 up front in rent helped convince them. No smoking, no drugs, and no rock and roll music after 9 p.m.
No rock and roll after 9 p.m.? I don't know, Jasmine. Maybe we should just call it a day. She slapped my arm. Jesus!
You don't take the Lord's name in vain around them either.
Jasmine then drove me to the Greyhound station. When we arrived, I got out of the Pinto and leaned in through the window. Jasmine, there's something you should know. My true name isn't Christian Vaughn. It's Chris Lamb. But don't worry, Christian Vaughn died back in '43, so no one's going to get wise about it. She shook her head in dismay.
Shimmering, gambling, taking some dead person's name?
I know, right? And here my high school guidance counselor said I didn't apply myself. When I got to Oakland, Chester Bartels showed me the garage apartment. It was dusty, there was no AC, but it was private. With the apartment bills switched over to Chris Vaughn's name, along with a birth certificate, I got myself a California driver's license. I then opened several checking accounts across the Bay Area, depositing the $125,000 in increments of $9,000 in order to avoid federal banking regulations requiring currency transaction reports for transactions over $10,000. In my day, they call this structuring. But it would take a few more years before the man got wise to that scheme. So, bada bing, bada bang, the money was in the bank and thus laundered. Going forward, I could conduct any CTR level transaction I wanted, such as writing a big check to Apple Computers. Jasmine and I were sitting in the Pinto in the Atari factory parking lot. I was spying the employees heading back to their cars after their shift with a pair of binoculars. They all looked alike, but wait, the lanky kid, maybe early to mid-20s, wearing torn jean shorts and flip-flops, opened the sliding door to a VW bus and sold boxes to some guys waiting in line. I remembered something about this, the blue boxes that tricked AT&T to call long distance without incurring charges. I handed the binoculars over to Jasmine. That's him. Jasmine put out her cigarette and took a look.
The scrawny hippie? He's the one?
That's him, all right. Steve Jobs. That's our ticket to the future.
Join us next week for episode 3 of the 6-part miniseries, Smells Like Time Travel. Be sure to hit like and subscribe.
The role of Jasmine Bartels was played by Ebony LaShawn on Fiverr. Most of the background music has been provided by Mixkit and Fesliyan Studios. The following popular music are Welcome Back by John Sebastian, Listen to the Music by the Doobie Brothers, Rocket Man by Elton John, Right Place Wrong Time by Dr. John, Money Runner by Quincy Jones, If You Leave Me Now by Chicago, and Gold Dust Woman by Fleetwood Mac.